Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me tonight for the NYU Stern Executive MBA Q&A with our academic director. It is my pleasure to have our academic director, Maher Said, join us tonight. Before we get started, I'll quickly introduce myself. I'll turn it over to Maher to introduce himself. And then for the duration of the event tonight, we'll start the event and I will ask Maher some questions that I've prepared to kind of get a sense of his role at Stern, teaching in the Executive MBA program and working directly with our Executive MBA students. And then we will turn it over to the audience for any questions that you might have for him. Feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen there to just submit your questions to us during the event. And then we'll save some time at the end to address any of those questions. All right, so my name is Cheryl Sanichara. I'm a director on the Executive MBA admissions team. I've been part of the admissions team and working at NYU Stern for the last 12 years. So I've really enjoyed my time working with professionals on their journey toward getting their MBA. Now I'll turn it over to Maher to just quickly introduce himself, tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maher Said. I'm a faculty member at NYU Stern in the economics department, where I've been for, I guess this is my 12th year at NYU now. And I'm also the academic director of the Executive MBA program here at NYU, which, it's sometimes unclear what exactly that means. Essentially, in my role, I'm sort of responsible for any and all curricular matters relating to the program. So everything from what's our core curriculum to what electives are we offering, which faculty are teaching in the program, and also interfacing pretty significantly with students in terms of just managing unique situations that come up and making sure that we are meeting students where they need to be in terms of achieving their goals with our program.
Okay, great. And how long have you been the academic director of our Executive MBA program? I know you mentioned you've been at Stern for 12 years.
Yeah, so I've been academic director of EMBA for almost a year and a half at this point. So I started teaching in our executive programs about 4 or 5 years ago, and then last year I took on this role as academic director. And it's been really a really sort of exciting, wonderful experience because as a faculty member, often we get bogged down in sort of the details of our own specific course or what we're teaching and our direct interfacing with our students. Stepping into this academic director role, it's actually been really interesting to be able to interface much more broadly across the spectrum of things that we do at Stern, across the full range of departments and faculty. And really thinking a little bit broader and a little bit more programmatically about what exactly are we trying to do with an executive MBA degree program and how best to design a program to meet those goals.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And in your opinion, what makes NYU Stern unique versus other business schools?
Oh, it's a great question. I think there's, just off the top of my head, there's several things that I think are really special about Stern and the way we do things here. One thing is, of course, NYU and Stern is a really, highly sort of research-driven university and institution where faculty are really doing sort of cutting-edge, next generation research in the full spectrum of academic disciplines, and at Stern in the full spectrum of disciplines that relate to business. So we're very lucky and fortunate that we have a number of, for instance, Nobel Prize winners on the faculty who have really developed and shaped entire areas of inquiry and opened up paths. But the other thing that I think that makes NYU and Stern in particular very special is in large part because we're embedded in the context of New York City, which is this global hub of economic activity, of business engagement, of, across, again, this huge spectrum of industries and areas. it forces a little bit of practicality onto that research endeavor. So it's not just, sort of, number crunching research purely for research's sake, although some of that, of course, does happen. But there is a real sense of we're trying to do things that are really tied to the problems that are arising in the business environment around us. And we do that in a world where, we're also very lucky to be and fortunate to be enriched by all the sort of cultural diversity of New York City and all of the energy that the city brings, the sort of unique ability to draw on a set of practitioner faculty who are doing really amazing things in their professional lives, but then come in and teach in our executive program to really sort of bring and marry the sort of combination of research and practice in a way that makes it really relevant to our students and our future leaders.
Okay, right. Fantastic. And as a faculty member, in addition to being the academic director, what courses have you taught in the Executive MBA program? Do you want to tell us a
So
little bit about that?
yeah, so I teach a course called Firms and Markets. It's a part of our core curriculum. This is a course that I've taught, across all of our executive MBA programs. And this is a course that's basically designed to give our students a comprehensive foundation and understanding of how markets work. Where do they create value? Where might they fail? What types of interventions might arise? And really thinking about the way in which competition, as mediated through market mechanisms, can really sort of drive things like innovation, how it affects corporate strategy and interplays with the trade offs that firms face, and really just to sort of create a comprehensive foundation on that front. And it serves as a course that in a lot of ways serves as a critical reasoning foundation for many of the other things that we do. So courses in finance or courses in strategy or courses in marketing all build on some of the tools that we develop in firms and markets, and they leverage them to those sort of more specific disciplinary functional areas.
Okay. And how would you summarize NYU Stern's approach to teaching, and particularly in the Executive MBA program?
I think the best way to describe it is we're trying to do three things. One is we're trying to be rigorous. And I think, I say trying, it's always a goal. I think we actually are remarkably successful at that. We have a rigorous program that's grounded in those research ideas and the developments and tools that our faculty are developing. And that's really pushing students to learn new skills, develop new techniques, and broaden their horizons in a really meaningful way. The second thing that I think is really critical to the way in which we teach, especially in EMBA, is there's a real focus on maintaining relevance, on keeping things directly related, not just to business as it was practiced in, say 2005 or 2010 or 2015, but business as it's being practiced today in 2025. And ideally, what we'd like to do is make sure that the way we teach is giving students that relevance and that rigor that's going to help them as they're making decisions in 2030 and 2035 and beyond. So it's really trying to be forward looking in that sense. And the third thing that I think that we try to do is we really have a focus on interdisciplinarity. There's a real sense, I think, in which business education and an executive MBA is really this incredible opportunity to provide a broad set of skills and a broad spectrum of disciplines that are really necessary for helping create that sort of multifunctional leadership that's necessary for business leaders in the current environment. It's really not sufficient to be, a specialist just in finance or a specialist just in marketing or a specialist just in strategic decision making or supply chain management. We want to be able to prepare students on their journey to the C-suite or on their journey in entrepreneurial ventures or through advancement in whatever endeavors. to really be able to take that sort of bird's eye view and integrate all of these different pieces of what's going on within an enterprise or within a business and really think carefully about how they work together and where different tools might come into play and where different tools might be necessary. And so that's a really, I think, important part of trying to develop that leadership skill and that agility that's really critical for success in markets.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I just wanted to add from the admissions perspective that I think the way that the curriculum is structured for the Executive MBA program is also a great way to help students really identify like what their professional goals are, what they want to do next in their career. And by completing the core courses and the core curriculum, they get a good knowledge base and like a building foundation of the different business disciplines. And then in year two, when they're able to move on to take electives, it really gives them a chance to narrow their field of study and really find what interests them or what they want to deepen their expertise levels in. And then with the elective courses that our students opt to take, they can actually specialize in up to 3 areas. So you have the option to like become sort of an expert in these different areas and then use that to shape your future career. So that's just something I always like to call out because I think the curriculum was thoughtfully designed. Okay, the next question. What do you find distinctive about our executive MBA students compared to other populations at Stern?
I think the most unique thing about executive MBA students, and this is certainly true compared to the other students that I've taught while at NYU and elsewhere, is there's a real sense of intentionality that is part of doing an executive MBA. In many settings, students are, you know, if you're an undergraduate, you're sort of, it's part of just like a necessary path that you follow. Or we have full-time MBA students where this is sort of just like the next step in part of a standard career progression. But in an executive MBA program, there's this real sense of, we're talking about people who have already achieved a significant amount of career success and are now saying, what do I need to do to invest in myself in this way that's going to provide me future opportunities and open doors and create value? And so that intentionality, I think, both heightens expectations. You're coming in with a real mindset of like, this is something different and difficult that I'm taking on. But it also creates some really great opportunities precisely because you bring together this diverse class of people with such substantial experience and you get these really interesting conversations where students are bringing their context, their real world experience, what they've done in their enterprises in the whole spectrum of business fields that they are involved in. And that enriches and enlivens the discussions in the class and, from what I understand, outside of the class, um, in a way that really transforms things from purely a classroom-based, theoretical exercise, but into something that's actually really practical. So for me, for instance, my favorite classroom experiences when I'm teaching an EMBA are things like, I'll be talking about how firms might engage in price discrimination, how they might be thinking about how do we design a line of products. And a student will, raise their hand and start explaining how in their company, they took a variety of different steps to intentionally segment the market and think about the trade-offs between those things and really bring to life some of those more abstract ideas and create a concrete relevance for their classmates and their peers that can really only occur in an environment where people are coming in with this significant background. And so in that sense, I think that the EMBA student population is really particularly unique and distinctive. Um, that also, I think, then lends itself to a number of really interesting sort of social dynamics. So there's an immense amount of collaboration that we see across our students. Students, especially again, when you've got people coming from these different backgrounds, they start to recognize, oh, this is the similarities in, how my industry or my enterprise works, as well as somebody else in a completely different market, in a completely different, sort of professional vertical. And they find those similarities, they find the differences, they find the complementarities. They're able to expand their networks in a much richer set of ways than what you might find in something that's a little bit more narrow or a little bit more focused. And that creates, again, these sort of long-term relationships where students, they rely on one another, they turn to one another down the road for recruiting. So, people talk about, they turn to their EMBA peers and ask them for recommendations of, who they should be hiring, and sort of, helping place some of their best, sort of performing employees who need to move on for for some reason or other. They work with them in those ways because it creates this sort of team-like environment where students are really seeing themselves as engaged in a real sort of peer relationship with these other leaders, and they're all journeying through this relatively intense experience together that really forms some very significant bonds.
Yes, I would definitely agree with you on that. Thank you for sharing. Um, Now, so I guess for those on the call, can you tell us a little bit about like the format of the schedule that our executive MBA students go through? Generally, they meet Fridays and Saturdays every other weekend from 9 a.m. to about 5 p.m.
Mhm.
But tell us more about the format and how
Yeah,
it sort of differs from a traditional MBA.
yeah. So the format is really quite unique. It has both challenges and opportunities. So a typical class weekend, students will arrive on campus sometime, between like 8 and 9 a.m. There's breakfast and an opportunity for students to meet and engage with one another. Often there's sort of event, a round table or a networking event or what have you. And then they'll have class from 9 until 10:30, a short break, and then class again from like 10:45 until 12:15. Lunch, which is we do on site. All EMBA students are eating lunch together, and again, that creates this opportunity for students to build bonds within their cohort as well as across cohorts with students from other years. And then they back to class again in the afternoon. And so you get 3 hours of class in the morning, 3 hours of class in the afternoon, and then again the same sort of thing on Saturday. So 3 hours of class Saturday morning, 3 hours of class Saturday afternoon. Um, so it's in some ways very intense. You're getting 12 hours of class time in within that Friday and Saturday, which as an instructor is kind of amazing, because you get to really build on things that happen at the beginning of class on Friday morning, and then you follow right up on it on Saturday morning. You have this really great opportunity to start having interesting conversations, to get the ball rolling on whether we're developing a tool or discussing a technique or doing a case analysis. And the longer class times gives that sort of breathing room for those discussions to have a little bit more richness, a little bit more of a sort of depth to them than what you might get in a more abbreviated session. Um, and then students break at the end of class on Saturday, and we see them again 2 weeks later. And that again has a really great ability to give some of those ideas time to percolate in your head. It's not like, okay, I'm coming back to class twice a week, every single week, over and over again, but rather you have these longer periods of time to really sort of sit with some of the ideas that you're thinking about. um, and that creates an opportunity, both of course, from a practical perspective. If there's like reading that you want to do or need to do to follow up on something that you did in class, it doesn't have to happen overnight. You've got those 2 weeks to do it. If you're engaged in a longer term project with some of your classmates or your cohort mates, you've got time to think about sort of coordinating and getting that done. Um, and then when you come back 2 weeks later, there's a sort of freshness and again this sort of intentionality of purpose that comes out of taking time out of our busy lives to be present and physically in this place together, where we get to do this all over again. So in that sense, it's I think a really great format. It it balances some of the considerations of what's really feasible for a working professional in 2025 in terms of all of the different directions in which we're being pulled and all of the constraints on our time. But it also, I think, allows us to really deliver a superior experience in terms of just how much time students have together and have with their faculty as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that I think the format is designed so well that our students in the Executive MBA program are able to continue working full time throughout the course of the 2-year program. And they can finish the program in the same time that it would take a student to finish a traditional MBA program who's not working. So I think the lockstep program of every other weekend works really well, and our students are really able to take the knowledge learned and reflect on it and bring it back 2 weeks later, as Maher said. Um, yeah. So at this point, I just want to remind everyone on the call that you can throw some questions into the Q&A if you have any questions for Maher. And I have just a couple more questions for him, and then we'll turn it over to the group for questions. So just pop your questions in there if you want to ask something. Okay, great. So I think you touched on this earlier, but is there a memorable like experience that comes to mind with our EMBA students that you could share with the audience on this call?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I have to think of like sort of like a most memorable experience. Um, again, the story that I turn back to is, we had this discussion in class where a student was um, offering sort of as a real life example the way her firm was developing the tiers for the product that they were delivering. So she worked in a software as a service startup, and there was just a sense of, you could see the light bulbs going off in other classmates' eyes as this one student was talking about the way in which her firm was approaching this problem of, how do I design a high tier of this product for sort of the most professional grade users, a lower tier for sort of intermediate, less advanced users, and then sort of like an entry level sort of freemium option. Um, and thinking about this interplay of like, how do we not dilute our product and how do we not offer too much? And those are precisely the sorts of trade-offs that we were talking about from a theoretical perspective when I was talking about sort of what's the economic approach to thinking about price discrimination and the way in which we target different customer segments. Um, and so it was just this really beautiful sort of melding of a classroom discussion with insights that the student, because she felt so comfortable with her peers, because they've had so much time to work together, that she felt very comfortable sharing that, this is something that her firm was doing and experiencing, and some of the struggles that they had. And frankly, some of the mistakes that she felt that they had made, that, had they had the ability to, be a little bit more careful in their design, they might have been better positioned to leverage that for even further success. And so I think what that highlights for me is, one of the real benefits of the program and its design is this idea that you might do something in class on Friday or Saturday, and then on Monday, you're there in your own
Mhm.
workplace and you can
Yeah.
start thinking about, how do I apply those ideas? How do I take what I just learned or what I just spoke about with a classmate or had a discussion with a faculty member about? How do I take those ideas and really leverage them into the actual sort of hard work of achieving further success in our professional lives? And so seeing that happening in real life, sort of in front of you in the classroom, in a way that, like I couldn't have actually designed that classroom experience any better, was really quite spectacular.
Yeah, yeah, no, that sounds amazing. Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. And then finally, what advice would you give to prospective executive MBA students? What are some things that you think will make them successful in the program?
So I think from my perspective, the things that are most critical for helping the student really maximize the value of the executive MBA is twofold. One is recognizing that it's a real commitment. It's a really sort of it's a serious 2-year program where you're going to work on that full spectrum of core courses and invest in electives and so on. And what that means is that to maximize the value, you really have to be, I think, intentional about using this as an opportunity for transformation. And that requires, I think, really careful and thoughtful goal setting, thinking about what are your professional goals, what are your personal goals, and knowing, therefore, what is it that you want to get out of the program. Because there are so many different ways in which you can experience EMBA. So as Cheryl was saying, there's a number of specializations you can take, and so you can think about, you know, am I looking for shoring up, uh, you know, a weak part of my professional portfolio? Or do I have some strengths that I really want to double down on and really dive deeper on? Or am I too narrow in some area and want to develop a broader, more general set of skills? And that self-reflection of, what is it that I really think is necessary for me and my career ambitions and my professional and personal goals, having a clear sense of that as you're thinking about entering into the program and beginning, that gives you precisely that ability to really think carefully about how to leverage all of the different opportunities that we have at Stern in order to achieve that success. And that then helps, I think, scaffold this process of taking the things that we're doing in the classroom or that you're doing on campus and figuring out how do I then apply them to that Monday morning conversation with a colleague or a peer or someone else.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so at this point, we'll turn it over to some questions from the audience on our webinar here. The first question that has come up is around lifelong resources for our Executive MBA alumni. Um, I guess meaning, can they audit classes? Are there any other benefits? Is that something that you can talk through?
Yeah, absolutely. So, alumni are critical to the continued success of the program. So we have a number of things that we do, both in terms of sort of alumni engagement more broadly, and then the inclusion of alumni within the program, as well as continued lifelong learning. So just off the top of my head, and I'm sure Cheryl, I'm going to miss some of the things that are available. Um, we have an opportunity and ability for alumni to audit classes in the future once they've graduated. So every semester, we have a number of alumni that are here. They're sitting in on classes. Some of them are auditing courses remotely, some of them are auditing courses in person. And this is an opportunity, whether it's a course that you were sort of wanted to take while you were here, but you decided to take something else, or
Mhm.
it's a new course that when you were an EMBA student, there was an area of expertise that just didn't exist yet. So for instance, one of my colleagues has been teaching a new course these last 2 years on climate finance. So how do we think about insurance and financial markets and how those work in a world where climate change is potentially a bigger concern, and we've got large climatic events, and um, this is an area of study that quite literally did not exist 5 years ago. And so we've got EMBA alumni who are working in finance, or who are working in insurance markets, or just are curious and want to continue their learning journey, sitting in on that class, on an ongoing basis. We also have a number of events where alumni and students have the opportunity to engage with one another, to network. There's alumni lunch and learns where we might sometimes have alumni come in and actually talk to students about their experiences. So recently we had an alumni who was working on AI at Google, who came in to our EMBA. He was an EMBA DC alum, and he came in and he did a hour-long lunch and learn, just sort of explaining to some of the current crop of students, how is it that Google within their firm, how are they seeing these trends develop? What's some of the sort of insights that he has from that workplace? And again, this sort of part of this idea that we're all part of a continued community, both your cohort as well as future and past generations of EMBA students, creates that sort of open space where some of these conversations can be had a little bit more frankly and a little bit more openly than might otherwise be the case.
All right, great. In addition to that, from what I recall, during admissions interviews, is that our alumni also are able to take part in executive education courses each year at a discounted rate. Like our executive education courses are like shorter, 1 to 2 day sessions that are on a specific topic. So that's definitely another benefit to add to the list. All right. Another question. Coming in about I guess like the diversity of the executive MBA students coming from different industries.
Mhm.
Um, I guess can you talk a little bit about the diversity of the class in terms of like people coming from different industries or
Yeah,
backgrounds?
sure. Um, so I don't know that I have a specific sort of numerical breakdown,
Sure.
just because I don't know that that's a useful measure given actually like how really truly diverse the student body is. We've got students that are working in media, and when I say working in media, some of them are working in strategy in media, some of them are working on like the marketing side of media. We've got
Mhm.
students that are coming from, the healthcare industry, whether they're working in healthcare management or, there's a number of students who are actually like MDs, who are practicing physicians, who are, looking to pivot or develop additional skills in furthering their careers. There's a number of students with backgrounds in finance and the financial industry, um, consulting, strategic management, supply chain, construct. I mean, quite literally the full universe and spectrum of um, essentially everything. I mean, I think the one area that I don't know off the top of my head if we have ever had any students that are in academia. So I don't know that we've ever had any like university faculty as students. So that might be the one thing that's missing. But again, why is that so helpful? It means that you have these opportunities to draw connections across fields. And so much of the way in which we learn is by analogy and by sort of identifying what's the commonality across different areas. And then where are the subtle differences where unique expertise is necessary. And so bringing all of these different students with all of these different backgrounds together in one place really creates for just a really beautiful mix of conversations and insights that are being driven by all of those different backgrounds. And it means that, when you're in class, as part of the core curriculum, there's going to be people that have a strong, rigorous background in accounting. They're often the people that others turn to for support as they're working through their financial accounting class, and you can sort of get a little bit more of a rich discussion going with those students, whereas somebody that's been working in finance, they may have a little bit more insight in a different course. And everyone has this sort of breadth of exposure to different leadership styles, to different managerial experiences, that then when you're thinking about how do we think about sort of a leadership experience, what exactly are the takeaways that are transferable and which ones aren't? And it really creates for I think a very dynamic environment. And as a faculty member, it's really quite a pleasure to be able to teach to that group, because you really never know what exactly is the new insight that you're going to get. Even if it's a course you've taught many times in the past, there's going to be somebody with some unique niche expertise that can speak very precisely to something that you're talking about and really enliven and enrich the discussion that's going on.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, the next question is on deliverables and assignments. Are those more project-based or individual for our EMBA students?
That really varies quite dramatically from course to course. So there's some courses where it really makes sense to do things on an individual basis. So I know my colleagues who teach our leadership course, a lot of the assignments there are really very much reflective, thinking about your own experiences, thinking about
Mhm.
where you've had successes as a leader, where you've maybe fallen short, and where there might be room for growth. And that's just necessarily something that has to be done on an individual basis. Whereas then there's other courses where, excuse me, where there is more of like a group project based approach, precisely because that might be the most effective way for people to really leverage each other's expertise and develop cross competencies and push one another in a meaningful way. And so in that sense, it really, we don't have a uniform policy on that. I think the majority of courses will have some mix of both. Um, and whether it's more of one versus the other is really going to be context dependent.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's what I've heard as well, from the admission side. Okay. And then in terms of specializations, I did mention this earlier, so a question came up. Um, do you know how many students roughly in the program choose to specialize in areas, and are there advantages or disadvantages in doing so?
So I don't know. Do you have a precise number of how many students do specializations? Is that something that your team has?
I don't have a precise number for how many students do, but I will say that what we've heard is that most students will choose to, so you can specialize in up to three areas, but most students will pick two.
Right.
That's the information that I have.
Yeah. So I don't have a hard number either. And what
Okay.
I would say is
And it's completely optional.
no,
So
exactly.
yeah,
And that's I think an important thing to highlight. So
yeah.
as part of the program, students can specialize in, can choose to do zero specializations, one specialization, two specializations, or three. Um, Doing three is very challenging and requires a lot of careful thought because it's sort of like thinking about trying to triple major in college, and there's just only
Yeah,
so many classes that you can take at one time,
exactly.
and finding things that might suit both and so on can be very tricky. So three is really rare. One and two is quite common, but zero is also common as well. And I think the what I tell students when they ask me, should I be doing another course for this specialization versus that specialization, is I try to frame it in terms of, well, what are your goals? To what extent does saying I have a specialization in, corporate finance, or I have a specialization in, uh, strategic management of technology, are those things that are going to help you in a conversation with a superior? Are they going to help open a door for you, or would it be more beneficial for you and your interests to maybe take a different course in another area, even if that doesn't mean you check the box that necessarily fulfills a specialization? So we certainly, don't discourage students from doing specializations. We don't necessarily like put a thumb on the scale and say, oh, you're expected to do one or two. It really is about what are your interests and your goals. Are there areas that you really want to dive deeper into and develop a little bit more expertise? Or do you have a sense of wanting to have a little bit of a broader exposure to a broader, richer sort of set of areas? And so it really is, in that sense, very much choose your own adventure. Um, and I think that's kind of this beauty of the way the process works. Our curriculum is designed so that in the first year, students all do a shared common core curriculum, so that we have a common foundation and baseline of depth of knowledge in all of the different disciplines. Um, and then in the second year, as students are taking electives, you get to see a little bit of this sort of, who's thinking about a specialization and who's not, and which ways in which they might change their minds. And sometimes students have said, I didn't really want to do I wasn't planning on doing a specialization, but then I realized that, I'd taken a number of courses that satisfy the requirements for one. And so why not just sort of, fill out the form necessary to make that official? And so
Mhm.
it's a little bit of following your own path of interest and seeing where that ends up.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And I believe in terms of the courses or the credits, you need about 9 credits in order to earn one specialization. So that's the breakdown of how that works.
That's right.
Um, okay, let's see if we have time for one more question. I came across one and I lost it. Let's see here. Um, Okay, so I will try to just rephrase this question a little bit, but for some people who might be joining an executive MBA program as sort of a pivot strategy for their career, can you tell us a little bit about some of the I guess some of the courses that are built into the curriculum that could help them with making a shift in their career? I mean, there are obviously career resources, but I think that's a separate group and a separate conversation. But I
Mhm.
do know there are like skill sets that are built into the curriculum to help with that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is, the one of the features of how we've designed the curriculum is, um, I think, very helpful for people that are actually thinking about making a pivot, um, because our courses, our elective courses, they don't require any prerequisites. There's not, oh, you have to have done XYZ in order to be able to take, a particular course. And so what that means is that if you're thinking of pivoting into a particular area, you've basically got our whole course menu available to you. So if you're thinking of, pivoting into something more, finance related, you can take courses on private equity or on mergers and acquisitions or on, managing distressed investments, without necessarily needing to worry about like, oh, do I have the formal, finance background? And that's because our core curriculum is designed to provide that sufficient finance background. Or if you're thinking of, pivoting into something in marketing, there's a full spectrum of courses that we offer in our electives on things like, consumer behavior or pricing or marketing strategy or brand strategy. And so, and that I think is one of these areas where this idea of the specialization becomes very helpful. Because to the extent that a pivot is something that you're interested in, you can almost view a specialization as saying, here's a sort of path, a set of courses that if you take these, that's going to give you a number of skills that are really designed for a particular business purpose or for a particular disciplinary area. Um, and so, in that sense, I think there's easy pathways towards finding those targets for where you would like to pivot to. And I do know, you said the sort of careers conversation is a separate conversation. But I do also think it's one of the things that we try to keep in mind is we're trying to always choose courses and bring new courses into the curriculum and sort of refine the set of offerings that we have in conversation with people that are have a little bit of a pulse of where is the field going, what's the future looking like, what areas are what skills are employers looking for, or what skills are students reporting that they need, or we do these alumni surveys where we talk to alumni and we ask them, after the fact, what are some of the things that have been most useful to you from your EMBA? And when you're coming back to audit, what are the things that you're looking for that you would like to find opportunities for? And we're always trying to think about sort of being very intentional and thoughtful in designing the breadth of the curriculum to take those things into account to make sure that we do have a forward-looking program, as opposed to something that's more, rooted in a sort of um, rigid sense of, what business should be.
Well, thank you. That was well said. All right. Well, we are at time, so I think we will end here. Thank you so much, Maher, for coming to this session and providing such valuable insights into our curriculum and the academics of the Executive MBA program. We really appreciate your time.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. And thank you to everyone who joined us on the call tonight. Thank you so much for coming and sitting through the session with us. A recording of the session will be available and will be sent out to you sometime tomorrow. So you can, reference the recording if you need to. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good night.